A man sold out IMAX screens for a movie a full year before it came out. Not a superhero movie, not a sequel, a 3,000-year-old Greek poem about a guy trying to get home from a war. That is the kind of power Christopher Nolan has right now. And this weekend, that power turned into $264 million in 3 days. Let's talk about how the Odyssey just quietly became one of the biggest opening weekends of the entire year. Hey, welcome back. If you're new here, this is the channel where we take box office numbers apart piece by piece and figure out what they actually mean, not just what the headline says. And this weekend gave us a genuinely wild data set to dig through. So grab a coffee, because we're going deep on Matt Damon, Christopher Nolan, IMAX film stock, and one Greek king who apparently cannot stop making studios money. Let's start with the basics. The Odyssey is Christopher Nolan's take on Homer, with Matt Damon playing Odysseus, and a cast list that reads like an award show seating chart. Zendaya, Tom Holland, and Hathaway, Charlize Theron, Robert Pattinson, Lupita Nyong'o. This is not a small production. Domestically, the film pulled in an estimated $124.5 million across roughly 3,900 North American screens. Add in the international side, $139.6 million from 73 markets, and the worldwide 3-day total lands at $264.1 million. Now here is why that number actually matters, and is not just a big figure to throw on a thumbnail. That is the single best global opening weekend of Christopher Nolan's entire career. Ahead of The Dark Knight Rises. Ahead of The Dark Knight. Ahead of Oppenheimer. For a director who has been making event movies for 2 decades, that is not a small milestone. That is the ceiling moving. Here is the part that should confuse you a little, in a good way. This is an R-rated, nearly 3-hour-long adaptation of an epic poem most people last touched in a high school English class. Movies like that do not usually open north of $100 million domestically. They open respectfully, they win some awards later, and everyone moves on. So why did this one explode instead of just performing well? A few reasons, and they stack on top of each other. First, the format. The Odyssey is the first feature ever shot entirely on IMAX cameras. Not partially, entirely. That is a technical flex that IMAX itself has been marketing for months, and it paid off. Premium large format screenings made up close to half of all domestic tickets sold, and full 70mm film screenings, the real deal, the kind that requires a specific projector and a dedicated print, accounted for 5% of tickets on their own, and average ticket price north of $22. People were not just going to see a movie, they were going to see a format. Second, the audience itself was unusual. Industry exit polling found that a large chunk of opening weekend ticket buyers were what the industry calls infrequent moviegoers, people who might only go to a theater a few times a year. Nolan has a track record of pulling that crowd off their couches in a way almost no other filmmaker in Hollywood can currently manage. That is not something a marketing budget buys you. That is reputation built up over Inception, Interstellar, Dunkirk, The Dark Knight trilogy, and Oppenheimer. Third, the reviews backed it up. The Odyssey landed a 95% critic score, the highest of Nolan's entire career, putting it alongside Memento, Insomnia, The Dark Knight, Dunkirk, and Oppenheimer as one of his best-reviewed films ever. Audiences agreed, handing it an Ace Cinema score, which for a 3-hour war epic about grief and homecoming is genuinely impressive. Let's put this in perspective against the rest of 2026, because this is where the numbers stop being abstract and start being kind of absurd. The Odyssey made more money in 3 days than the entire theatrical run of several other major releases this year. Wuthering Heights, Steven Spielberg's Disclosure Day, Scream 7, the ensemble comedy The Sheep Detectives, Mortal Kombat 2, Send Help, and the drama Reminders of Him. All of those films, across their entire theatrical lifespan, earned less than what Nolan pulled in over a single weekend. That instantly rockets the Odyssey into position as one of the 15 biggest movies of the year globally, after just 72 hours in theaters. And remember, this film has not even opened yet in China, Japan, or South Korea. 3 of the biggest box office markets on the planet are still sitting on the sidelines for this number. Now let's talk about why this opening weekend was not just nice to have, it was essential. The Odyssey reportedly cost $250 million to make. That is before marketing, which for a global tentpole like this typically adds another $100 million or more once you count worldwide prints, advertising, and promotion. The general industry rule of thumb is that a big-budget film needs to earn roughly 2.5 times its production budget, just to break even once you account for the cut theaters take and the cost of actually getting the movie in front of people. Run that math on a $250 million budget, and you get a break-even point somewhere around $625 million worldwide. That sounds like a mountain to climb. It is not, based on what we are seeing. Movies with front-loaded, premium format-driven openings like this one tend to have strong legs, meaning they keep earning steadily instead of collapsing after week one. If the Odyssey simply matches the trajectory of a film like Deadpool and Wolverine, which is the only R-rated movie in history to have a bigger international opening weekend than this one, it could plausibly finish its run somewhere in the range of $775 million worldwide. And there's a real argument for going even higher than that. Nolan's last 3 non-superhero tentpoles, Interstellar, Dunkirk, and Oppenheimer, all showed strong holding power over their runs rather than fast drop-offs. Oppenheimer specifically finished its run at $975.8 million worldwide, despite opening at less than a third of what the Odyssey just opened at. If the Odyssey holds anywhere near that well, a billion-dollar finish is not some wild fantasy stat. It is a legitimate possibility on the table. Now, because we like to look at the whole picture here and not just the flattering part, let's talk about what happened right after that huge debut, because it tells its own story. The second weekend came in around $49.8 million domestically. That is a drop of roughly 60% from the opening. On paper, that sounds alarming, but context matters here. A huge portion of that opening weekend was built on advanced ticket sales. Remember, some of those IMAX screenings sold out a full year in advance. That means a large slice of the film's most dedicated, most excited audience had already seen it by Sunday night. A steep second weekend drop after a pre-sale heavy debut is a well-understood pattern, not a warning sign on its own. Compare that to Oppenheimer, which dropped a relatively gentle 44% in its second weekend. But Oppenheimer also had the entire Barbenheimer cultural wave, pushing casual moviegoers into theaters who had not planned on going that weekend at all. The Odyssey does not have that same viral, 2 movies in one day phenomenon working in its favor, so a sharper drop was always the more realistic outcome. The good news for Universal is timing. There are no new major wide releases scheduled to open against the Odyssey in its second weekend, which gives it a clear, uncontested runway to keep pulling in ticket sales before Spider-Man. Brand New Day arrives and starts competing for the same premium format screens. Step back for a second and look at what just happened here. A filmmaker took one of the oldest stories in human history, shot the whole thing on a format most directors treat as a luxury add-on rather than the entire production, cast it with a lineup of A-list actors across nearly every generation of Hollywood stardom, and turned it into his biggest global opening ever. Bigger than any Batman movie he has made. Bigger than Oppenheimer during peak Barbenheimer mania. That is not luck. That is 2 decades of building a specific kind of trust with audiences. The trust that a Nolan movie is going to be worth leaving the house for, worth paying the premium format upcharge for, worth planning your weekend around. Very few directors working today can say that with a straight face, and this weekend just prove it again with real numbers attached. So here is where things stand. $264 million worldwide out of the gate. A 95% critics score. A break-even point that is already within reach. And a legitimate, data-backed path to $1 billion finish if the legs hold up anywhere close to Nolan's track record. We will be tracking this one closely as the international rollout continues into China, Japan, and South Korea, because those numbers could genuinely reshape where this movie lands on the all-time chart. If you want that follow-up the moment those numbers land, you know what to do. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss it. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.